It is almost September, which is crazy. But what that means is that it's time for a reading wrap up. I didn't do a reading wrap up in July, so this is going to be every single book that I read in July and August. I read 16 books. I had quite a few 5-star reads, quite a few series that I'm like so obsessed with and so excited to tell you guys about. And I actually read more than just 16 books because I read a bunch of unpublished manuscripts for a special project that I have coming out in September. If you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, I already posted about what that special project is there. And I also posted a YouTube short about it. So honestly, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have no excuse. I'll have a little link in the description if you missed it and want to see like what I'm talking about, or you can just wait for the launch video in September. Anyway, so I think I read like 3 unpublished manuscripts. So technically I read like 19 books, but obviously those 3 manuscripts I can't talk about yet until my project launches. Oh my gosh, you know what I just realized? I did a video at the beginning of August of random prompts, pick my TBR, and I only read 1.5 of the books from my TBR that I had planned for August. I'm just like such a mood reader. It's so hard for me to follow TBRs. I kind of failed on following my TBR. Anyway, let's get into it. I'm just gonna go in order from the first book I read at the beginning of July all the way through the most recent book I read. First up, I read Into the Tide by Laura Pavlov. It was cute. It has a lot of great tropes. It's brother's best friend, it's small town, it's kind of like forbidden romance vibes just because it is brother's best friend, and so like they really are hesitant to get together because of that. It also takes place over one summer, so it's a great summer book. I believe I ended up giving the book 3.75 stars. I don't know how to describe it, but I feel like the writing style could have been a little bit better. This is like my literal single only complaint. I feel like there wasn't enough show don't tell. Like sometimes I feel like the author was just directly telling us like this is what the character's thinking. But our 2 main characters are Lila James and Hugh Reynolds, and this is the first book in a series. They can all be read as standalones, and all the other books in the series follow Hugh Reynolds' siblings. Hugh just has such like a big, like fun, like loving family, so I definitely would read the other books in the series to see all of his siblings' romances. Next up, I read Kisses and Croissants. This book is so freaking cute. It's young adult. This one also takes place in the summer. It's about Mia, who is an aspiring dancer, and she's doing this summer program in Paris, which is just like such a magical summer setting. She meets a cute French boy, like what could get better than that? I was a little worried going into this that it was gonna be a little more like too surface level, like not have a ton of depth and just be like a fun, chill romance. And it is that, but I loved it. You know when you read a book and you've got that like movie of it going in your head? This was like such a fun book to picture just because like all the settings and activities were so fun. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. Oh my gosh, I also have to show you guys this cool virtual bookshelf I've been filling out with every single book I've read this year. Look how cool it looks. It's like so aesthetic and satisfying to fill out and color in every time I finish a book. And I've been filling out this little bookshelf template with Notability. Just wanted to say thank you so much to Notability for partnering with me on this video. They are a note-taking app and they have so many cool templates. Like when I tell you, I genuinely like don't know how I kept track of my life and like to-do lists before Notability. Like that's so genuine. Like I'm not just saying that because it's sponsored. The weekly planner template I use, I could not function without. I just went on a trip, did like a whole packing list in Notability. They even have like coloring pages, which is so cool. And there's a million more templates and cool features in Notability, like whether you're a student, working, or just like keeping track of your personal life. I would highly recommend checking out the Notability app, and I will have a link to the app in my description. It's completely free to use and I'm genuinely so obsessed with it. Next up, I read Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. One of my friends, this is his book and he was letting me borrow it. And this is a book of short stories of Norse mythology. So this is like something so different for me, like definitely out of my comfort zone, just in it being a book of short stories, it being about mythology, which I've started to delve into a little bit, but not a ton. And also that it doesn't have any romance. Like that is hugely out of my comfort zone. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, not because there's anything I disliked about it, just because I feel like with short stories, they can't be like as gripping or as in-depth as like a whole long novel. If you love like the Thor movies and you know like Thor and Loki, they are the main characters in this book, and it was really fun having seen those movies to get a bunch of like the history and mythology behind that. Like there's a story in here of how Thor gets his hammer and like Loki just being really cunning and mischievous throughout all these stories. So it was a super fun read. Next up, I read The Midnight Library, because this is also something that I thought was going to be out of my comfort zone, and it is a bit different than what I typically read just because it's not a genre I typically read. I feel like it's more just like straight fiction with this also touch of like magic with this magical library. Basically, it's about Nora Seed, who has decided that she no longer wants to be alive. She's going to take her own life, and she ends up in the Midnight Library. And the Midnight Library is this library that's kind of like the in-between life and death, and you can take a book off the shelf and see how your life would have been differently if you had made a different choice. So she's like reliving different versions of her life if they had gone in different directions. This is a great book if you really want to like feel introspective, really think about your life. It made me question a lot of my own decisions in life. Like, hey, I made this huge decision so many years ago. If my decision had gone differently, my life could look so different now. And that's a crazy feeling and like thing to think about and contemplate. I ended up giving it 3.75 stars just because I feel like the ending was a bit predictable, and it also got a tiny bit repetitive for me at the end. Then Siege and Storm. This is the sequel to Shadow and Bone, and I felt mixed about this book. I still ended up giving it 4 stars just because I like love the series overall and I'm like invested in it, but this book moved a bit slower for me. If you're not familiar with the series, it's about Alina, and she's just like a normal seeming gal, and then she discovers that she has these powers to like summon light. And there's all the typical fantasy elements, this like cool, unique fantasy world. There's like the bad guy, we've got the romance subplot, armies, you know, all that good stuff. And I loved the first book. I loved the first book. So it was definitely a bummer that this one moved slower. I also have heard that people don't like Mal, who's the main love interest. And in the first book, I was like, what? How could you not love Mal? Like, I love Mal. But then in book 2, I was like, okay, Mal is just so boring. But I feel like the ending did seem to be set up in a way for the last book to be like very exciting and fast paced. That's my hope and prediction. So I'm definitely gonna read the 3rd book. Then Flawless by Elsie Silver. Everyone has been talking about this book. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it so much. So much. This is a cowboy romance, which like, why have we not seen like a super popular cowboy romance before? Maybe we have and I live under a rock and don't know about it, but it was so fun to read a cowboy romance. I want more of them. Basically, our main character is a bull rider, which is so fun, like a whole world I know nothing about. And he does something that kind of messes up his image. So his agent sends his daughter to like babysit him to make sure he like doesn't mess up his image anymore. So he's like stuck with her. So we've got this like forced proximity, kind of sports romance elements with the fact that he's a bull rider, small town. He also has this big family, and this is the first book in the series. It's a standalone, and then all the other books in the series are gonna follow his brothers. I'm so excited for that. Then I read Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing. Oh my god. This book. I'm so obsessed. Okay, I'm literally being so annoying right now. 6 out of 5 star read. When I started this book, I thought it moved a little bit slow at the beginning. Maybe that's just me. So if you start it and you feel that way too, stick with it because it's worth it, I promise. This is a new adult dragon romantasy. New adult is just like my favorite age group to read. Romantasy, like come on, love fantasy romance. And dragons, again, like need more cowboy romance, need more dragon books. I've never read any book with dragons, I don't think. At least not dragons being like an integral main part of the book. We have Violet, who is going to join the War College to be a dragon rider. So it's like this very intense initiation process, very deadly initiation process. And then we've got Xaden, who you're never sure if he wants to kiss or kill her. Like Xaden and Violet are enemies. I thought like I knew enemies to lovers. But when you get into fantasy, that's when you get to real enemies to lovers. Like when characters maybe want each other dead, like they're actual enemies, and I love that dynamic. Then, what I have been focusing on reading this whole month is the Shatter Me series. I only own the first book, and I've been getting the rest of the books from my library. I've read every single book and novella except the last book and the last novella. So it's a lot of books / novellas. And I've given the books and novellas a mix of 4, 4.5, or 5 stars, but overall a 5-star series for sure. The first book, 100% of 5 stars. I read this book in 24 hours. On a Sunday morning, I was just a little bored. I was like, you know, let me start Shatter Me. And then it was like 8 hours later and I was still reading it. It's fantasy romance and it's young adult. It's about Juliet, whose touch is lethal. Or I shouldn't say it's fantasy, sorry. It's dystopian because the world is run by the Reestablishment, which is this like bad government group who has taken over the world. And when the book starts out, Juliet is in solitary confinement, but the Reestablishment has plans for her. They want to use her as a weapon. And so many great side characters. Kenji is my favorite character by far. I am filming a reading vlog of me reading the whole series, so that should be out very soon, definitely in September. But yeah, that is all the books that I read in July and August. I'm so curious, what was y'all's favorite book that you read in July or August? Because I'm definitely looking for books to add to my September TBR. All right, and with that, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.